Welcome, everybody. Monday, June 27th. This is the East Long Meadow High School School Building Committee. Thank you for all taking some time. I know it's a little bit earlier than we usually have these meetings, so thank you for taking some time out of your day. And I think we have over a quorum. Don, do we have anybody on, maybe is on the visitor side? All set?
I'm here, Gordon. Thank you.
Oh, hey, Kathy, how are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Good, good. All right, so I think we're all here. All right. Turn the meeting over to our chair, Mr. Crucial.
Fantastic. Welcome, everyone. It's been a little bit. So first order of business is approving the minutes from 5:25. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
So moved. Is there a second?
Kathy, huh?
I'll second.
All right. Any
Roll call
discussion?
vote?
I'll do a roll call. Any discussion on it before we roll call?
I think they're clean.
Okay. All right, alphabetical order. Pam?
Yes.
Yes. All right, good. Steve?
Yes.
Yes. Joe?
Yes.
Bruce?
Yes.
Kathy Hill?
Yes.
All right. And Danielle is absent.
Oh, she's there.
Oh, she there?
Yep.
Oh, beautiful. Daniela?
Yes.
Yes. Steve Lonergan?
Yes.
Mary?
Yes.
Frank? Do you agree with the minutes?
Yes.
All right. Ryan?
Abstain.
Actually, Frank, you may have to abstain too.
Oh, yeah, I was mad at that one, so.
Okay. Okay. I'm a yes, and Greg?
Yes.
Okay, so that passes. We are on to the next agenda item.
Next agenda item, an update from our owner's project manager, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Steve. And for those of you who I haven't met, I'm Ben Murphy with Skanska. We're the owner's project manager. So we wanted to include, I think, Gordon, if you could just skip up one so we can all see the schedule slide.
Okay.
Gordon's pulling that up. So we included it in the presentation today, a slide of the schedule, just to show you folks what's transpired since we last met in May. And so we condensed most of the modules on this and just, opened up module 3, the feasibility study, which we are in currently, just to show you guys where we're at with that. So on May 25th, we had a kickoff meeting with the Massachusetts School Building Authority, and that was really just to introduce the town and the whole team to the Module 3 feasibility study requirements and just the whole process, and then going on forward from there, just taking us through all the modules. So it was really just an informational meeting to serve as a kickoff there. So that went off without a hitch. And then you'll see the next activity underneath that is the PDP submittal development. So again, that is the preliminary design program submittal development. We've shown this just as one activity. I will say that within that activity, there are many other sub-activities taking place with the design team, with the OPM, as well as the town. How we are tracking all of those items and deliverables for the preliminary design program submission is we're meeting every 2 weeks with the senior leadership team meeting. And on that team is Gordon, Steve, Pam, Frank, Heather, and Ryan as well. So once again, we just meet bi-weekly just to track those items because we are targeting a submission of the PDP at the end of August of this year. And so for that submission, we will be required to get a vote from the school building committee, basically just saying that we can turn over our submission to the state. So we will need to, at the end of this meeting, I think we'll need to schedule. I'm not sure if we'll do one in July as well, Steve and Gordon, but we will definitely need to hammer down I think so. I think it makes sense. One more information, I'll show you where we're at. And then after that, we'll need the formal approval for the state. And so that kind of just wraps up that module 3.1 PDP. And you'll see from there, once we receive comments, the review comments back from the state, we will then move into the preferred schematic report. And you'll see that taking us through spring of next year. And so like I said, we basically condensed all of the remaining modules. I know I've told you this in the past, folks, but this is really, I don't want to say a tentative schedule, but It is subject to change, a lot of the dates on here. The main reasoning is we're not sure exactly what the project is going to be at this point. We need to study all of the alternatives, and then once we do get a preferred solution, then we'll start to know a little more how this schedule is going to play out, and we'll be able to put more firm dates to things. With that being said, you're going to hear about a little bit more of these other activities I've been alluding to from the design team here, with the existing conditions evaluation, as well as some of the educational programming and visioning meetings and data collection that they've had to date. So
Is the 11/9 the projected townwide vote?
that is a projected townwide vote. So we held November. That date is just out of thin air, but we'll definitely keep an eye on that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Next up is Fantini and team.
Yep. I think Christian is controlling the PowerPoint remotely. So we will move into existing conditions report. And I think Christian is actually up first.
I think it's Eric, Helen, but yeah, we did do 2 different visits out to the site. One to work with the site team, and then one to work more on the building itself. And I'm going to pass it off to Eric to talk about existing site.
And for those who have not met Eric yet, this is Eric Vangsness. He's a landscape architect with SMMA and also a graduate of this institution, this school district. So, yeah.
Proud class of 2001, so.
Welcome back.
Thank you very much. So that's why I have the big smile on my face. Obviously, this is a dream come true, let me just first say. So what we wanted to start off with today is just reviewing kind of where this site sits in relationship to the town, right? And what is this site surrounded? What makes this site special? And just by looking at this first aerial, I think it becomes readily apparent. So this site is a little bit less than a mile from the Rotary. And it's a large site. It's about a little over 61 acres from what we gathered. And it's a single parcel. The frontage is on Maple Street. There's 3 points of access basically from Maple Street. And they're right in front of the building with the horseshoe drive, and then there's the ancillary connection to the at the northeast corner, and then there's a secondary access down on Norden Street. So the site has residential properties in Maple Street to the north, St. Michael's Parish to the east, Lennox Industrial Tools, I knew it as American Saw growing up, to the south, a couple more businesses, industrial businesses to the south as well, Excel Dryer and Silverson Machines. And then we get into the neighborhoods, Laurie Lane and Norden Street and Berry Road and the Marshall Street, I'll call them residences to the south and to the west. But I think what makes this site so special is it's this huge green park amidst all this developed space. And very, very few towns get an opportunity to have such an expansive program of athletic fields and open space when the rest of it is so highly developed. So this gives you an idea of where the site sits in town. Obviously to the west is Longmeadow. Right now that we know of, there is no town-owned connection to Chestnut Street. So when we first had these initial conversations, there has been some talk about, could we make a connection to Chestnut Street to maybe alleviate some of the congestion on Maple Street? Right now, the town does not own any property to that effect. There could potentially be some opportunities, and we'll get into this when we get into the kind of the preliminary site studies of potential connections, but that would have to be coordinated with the owners of the properties to the south. Next slide, Christian. So we go from this larger context, kind of more to be site specific. So we can see the same basic features here, but getting a little bit more into how the site operates and how it's bounded. So again, there's the existing horseshoe drive. When we came out here in late May, we saw that in the morning, the buses were dropping off a little bit earlier than the school opening times. We saw some come in at around 6:45 or so. So we saw kids actually waiting at the front door for the school to open. And then the buses would leave. And then it seems like the Horseshoe Drive then gets really occupied by passenger cars. So we saw some of that. We did see some parents, students and faculty using the northeast entrance, both for parking and for drop-off. So we saw that as well. So in the morning, we do see some congestion on Maple Street. I don't think the whole school population was there that day, so I think it might be a little bit more than what we saw, but you know, Maple Street westbound gets a little backed up because they're at the mercy at the northeast entrance and at the main entrance of vehicles coming the other way, basically stopping to let them turn in. And the same thing you see up at Maple Street.
Can I break at that point to that? Do we look at a comprehensive project, meaning going out into the street and perhaps making that 3 lanes as part of the project? I don't know if that would require eminent domain or, but if it would improve access to that, is that something we're focused on?
It's a good question. So as we get further into this, there would be a traffic engineer brought on board. Landscape architects, you know, the site design team doesn't typically get into the traffic counts and those types of measures. That's more of a traffic engineer. So I don't think anything is necessarily off the table at this point, but we'll look to kind of get their feedback once we bring the traffic engineer on. It's a good question.
There's a reality to it, and that backs up everyone, not only those trying to get into the building, but those trying to just get by it, and it goes close to the center sometimes. So
Yeah.
I'm sure you know that.
Yeah. Greg, one of the things they were pitching earlier, which I thought was awesome, was purchasing that potential plot of land through the back of Lennox, so you can dump out on Chestnut, which would take a huge pressure point off the center, you know? So I don't know if that's a possibility, but if you're gonna have a project like that, eminent domain or maybe expanding our property, I would love to see it go on to Chestnut.
I think part of the issue might be that the houses are close to the road, so it may not be possible, but just to keep an eye on that, because it's there. That's a reality that backs way up in the morning, drop off.
And I can remember from firsthand, you know, when I was in the middle school, we would take the bus, we would come via the middle school or come through the center of town, drop off here and then go back to the middle school. And the traffic in the morning, I mean, our bus to the middle school is late almost every day. So, and then in the afternoon, we were talking with Frank and I've seen this firsthand, not so much on the day we were here because they were actually doing road work right in front of St. Michael's Church. But my understanding is when the school is fully occupied, you can get a backup literally from the Rotary almost back to campus. So, you know, that's certainly, you know, something I experienced firsthand and I'm not surprised as, you know, has continued itself.
It flushes quick though.
Okay.
It does. I you know, go through it. It's a large volume. I don't think there's many options. I think we've done what we can.
Okay. So those are the access points from Maple Street. Again, on the site, you know, some of the features of note. We saw that in the afternoon, in the PM dismissal, our understanding of what we witnessed is that the school buses enter the Horseshoe, they stage there, they are released, and then parents line up in the parking lot, in the large parking lot, the main parking lot, and they wait there, they do pickup, and then once the buses are released, then the parents are released. But what we did witness is a few parents, mostly on the north side of the parking lot where there's that second connection to the Horseshoe, were getting out and leaving before they were dismissed. And then, of course, the northeast entrance at afternoon, I mean, it appeared just downright dangerous in terms of you've got 3 lanes of cars converging into one. We saw people going up the wrong way, you know, on the entrance drive of that northeast access point. So everybody sort of comes together. There's really no traffic management measures present in that main parking lot right now. So it's really just everybody converges, it clusters and bottlenecks up, and then eventually, you know, I think we saw by 2:15, most of those cars had exited. In fact, I think we actually saw that entrance clear out later than the Horseshoe. The Horseshoe seemed to be empty, and this one was still backed up, which I thought was interesting. You'd think some people would go the other way, but we also saw that some parents were picking up students in St. Michael's Parish. Right now, there's a sidewalk that runs along the north side of Maple Street, and there's the signalized pedestrian crossing. There's also one on the west side of the Horseshoe, the signalized one at the east side of the Horseshoe, but there's no real defined crossing at the northeast entrance. So what we saw was a lot of kids were actually walking east. They cut through the lawn, they go through St. Michael's Parish. Some are picked up by cars, some continue on to, points north and east from there. But there's really no dedicated pedestrian routes for them to do that. It's walking through grass and private property. On the site, there's the 6 existing tennis courts. Those are in fair condition. They're going to need to be resurfaced pretty soon. We heard in the 2 to 3 year time frame. There's the existing football stadium or multi-sport synthetic turf field for many of the college sports, and the stadium with the bleachers. We did note some, the press box and the announcer's box are not ADA accessible. They don't have a ramp up to them. We also noticed some, condition issues with the concession stands, and I know there was concern by the athletic director about the condition of those. The field itself and the track look to be in very good condition. I think there's a plan in the next several years to once again resurface the track, but the turf field. Okay. So that's obviously a great facility. And then in the back, which is, such a great part of this site, there's so many athletic fields that offer so many recreation opportunities to not just the schools, but also the rec department. And so there's the 2 existing baseball fields, and then there's a series of 6 other fields, some that overlap the outfields of the baseball fields and some that are sort of in between them. And so that's for lacrosse and soccer, I hear even t-ball is played at that back softball field, even though that softball field is not necessarily suitable for high school sports. We understand that the softball is currently being played at the middle school fields, the 2 fields at the middle school. There's of course a desire to bring that possibly back to this site if that were possible. So we'll certainly keep that in mind. The staff parking and student parking was another interesting thing we learned about. So we learned of the red line that basically divides where the staff and faculty are supposed to park and then the students. But we understand that that's not really policed, and we did see some mixing of students parking where the faculty are supposed to be. So we understand that one desire of the new design would be to possibly separate those out and have dedicated staff parking and then dedicated student parking so that there's not the mixing and matching. And then just, again, there's wooded wetlands we should keep in mind to the south. And in terms of just a quick touch on utilities that we should keep in mind, a good majority of the site ends up draining toward the existing stormwater pond at the southeast corner. And right now we've noticed some issues, and we've talked with Bruce and the other staff about some drainage related issues in terms of roof drains that are tied into floor drains. During heavy events, we understand the boiler room floor drains actually back up and that water can get into the boiler rooms. We also understand right now sewer is gravity fed, and there's some issues associated with it doesn't have much pitch to it. So every year or 2, we understand there's blockages that can occur, and those blockages have to be flushed out. Municipal water services the site, both the irrigation system and the building itself. We do understand though that that's asbestos cement material. So, we would certainly, that would be an opportunity to upgrade that to a more modern material like a ductile iron or something of that nature. So, but again, it's a magnificent property. You don't want to take that away from it. It's a magnificent property, and there's a lot of opportunities here. Next slide, Christian. Okay. And then just more site specific. We already talked a little bit about the arrival patterns, how the horseshoe ends up getting a little bit clogged with, school buses and passengers cars getting intermixed. Again, most of the school buses come on the earlier side. That seems to have quelled that a little bit. And again, we weren't here when there was the most traffic that you could have seen, but you can see with those top 2 pictures that, again, both types of vehicles are using it. PM dismissal, again, we talked about that as well. And you can see that image in the upper right kind of shows all those lanes of cars converging at the northeast corner. Generally, site-wide, the pavement is in fair to poor condition. There's a lot of cracking, potholes. There's, surfaces that are not ADA compliant. So the pavement really needs to be upgraded. Parking, you can see that that's the delineation between the staff and the student parking. And again, it's just not a physical enough barrier to really reinforce that. And just to get a little bit into, right now, accessibility is a challenge on site. Most of the accessible parking spaces probably would not meet code either from a slope perspective. There's very few dedicated accessible routes that are clear to people using those parking spaces or are just not present at all. And even many of the curb cuts, like the one in the lower right picture right there, the curb cuts should be constructive of a rigid material. They should have detectable warning surfaces when there's a street crossing, and they should be of all proper slopes. So these are all the things from a site perspective that we would be looking at, regardless of what option is chosen going forward as to how to upgrade those to make them more compliant. And I think just in general, the accessible parking is a long way from the entrance. And is there a way that we can get the accessible spaces closer to the entrance and more spread out around the facility? Again, kind of the same topics of conversation. Just like the roadway pavement, the walkways are in fair to poor condition generally. You see large cracks, you see, measures that have been taken over the years to kind of grind down heaving sections. In a lot of the asphalt walkways, there's just potholes and there's areas where the pavement failed and it's not, it's not in suitable condition. Slopes, again, we'd have to take a look at. We are fortunate on this property that, generally once you come in from Maple Street and you get to the existing building, it's a pretty flat site. The loading dock is very undersized right now for a high school. There is no loading dock. It's an at-level receiving area. I know we talked to Bruce, and there'd be some interest to having a full loading dock with a leveler. Right now, the larger tractor trailer trucks really can't even get into that loading space. So we understand they end up pulling up in the horseshoe and in the parking lot, and then DPW comes in and helps sometimes with the offloading. So again, as we look at this, we would look to design a loading and access facility that can meet the demands of those trucks, that can allow you to have one centralized loading space. The internal courtyards are beautiful. I understand that since COVID, there's been kind of a renewed interest in the use of the outdoor learning spaces. We'd certainly love to learn more from you about the program that you have right now for those spaces. We see the greenhouse there, and it looks like there's furniture out there. They look reasonably well maintained. I think access is difficult especially in a green interior courtyard, because there's just the one basically pass through from the outside of the building across the corridor into the space. So maintenance with those types of courtyards is always a consideration. We talked a little bit about the press box and the concession stands. And again, the athletic director relayed some concerns about the condition of those. In terms of the athletics fields, they're generally in good condition. They drain well. We didn't see any pooling water despite the proximity of wetlands. They seem to be in good condition. Again, you're fortunate. The town's very fortunate to have such a large facility that can accommodate so many fields. And I know that translates also into the ability to do 4th of July fireworks and summer concerts and all these other wonderful community events. So we see this, the school obviously is the primary tenant of this space, but we also see this as a town park. We do. There's just so many town users that benefit from this space. And just some of the other wonderful things about this property that we don't want to go unseen, the main entrance green, it's beautiful. There's a lot of, it doesn't seem to be used maybe to the extent that it could, but just beautiful mature trees. It's a beautiful green front door into the building right now, whereas most of the time you just see parking lots and pavement. This is an opportunity to see this beautiful green. And we touched a little bit again on the utilities. That's the existing stormwater detention pond, and that also fronts on those wooded wetland areas. So.
Any questions on that site-related existing conditions?
Is there a buffer from the existing wetlands, specifically the drainage pond there?
It's a great question. So we don't know yet. We will have a wetland specialist actually delineate what are wetlands on the site. Now, what we can tell you is that, in looking at the pond, there is, just by eye, just from my experience, it does look like it has naturalized. It doesn't look like a typical detention pond you would see at, let's say, a shopping center or something like that. It does appear to have naturalized. It does appear to have water in it most of the year. So we'll have to see. But yes, if there's whatever's mapped as a wetland, there's a state 100-yard or 100-foot buffer from those wetlands that at least would be under the Conservation Commission's purview.
I think you're up, Christian.
Great. Well, again, I just want to thank all of the staff at the school, because we were out there for 2 different days and really got a thorough tour of the site and the building. These are some pictures from our structural engineer from RSE, our structural engineering consultant. And I think, for the most part, it's, as you'd expect, different structural systems for the spaces and also for the 3 different eras of the building, the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. So most of it is open web steel joists with a metal roof deck. And then where that becomes a floor for the second floor, there's a concrete slab that's on top of that metal roof deck, as in number 2. The gym is steel bents. So those are those kind of large framed members that you see spanning the gym. The 1973 edition is a space frame, which is basically just an open web steel truss, but going in both dimensions so that it really can span quite considerable distances. The swimming pool also has open web joists that are long span. And in terms of structural condition of the building, it's actually in pretty good structural shape. I think the big question on this is, if we do renovate it, what measures would need to be taken to help support the existing structure. So would additional shear walls have to be included? Would the masonry walls need to be structurally tied off to the metal structure at the top of the walls? And unfortunately, we really can't get to that until we get a more defined ad reno scheme. But it's something that we're tracking with RSE, and we look forward to figuring out more on that ad reno scheme. Any questions on existing structural? In terms of the architectural, the building has held up well for 60 years. The circulation is quite convoluted, and I think you all are well aware of that. The finishes are robust, though the colors are of course dated, since the most of it is that glazed brick that once you pick the color, that's it forever. There's other poor architectural conditions which I'll get into, but really everything is to be expected for a building of this age. And we are getting a hazardous materials report done right now. There are significant quantities, and we'll be able to itemize that later as the process moves on. In terms of the positive side, the school is really being well utilized, and the staff is doing the best that they can. I mean, I think Dorian particularly, who spent a lot of time with the staff at the programming interviews, was really impressed with how they were working to show student display, utilize the outdoor spaces that Eric mentioned, the courtyards, especially the one in front, and then the one by the classrooms. Very strong athletic and sport wellness focus. And then, just constant examples throughout the building of universal design for learning of really trying to meet students where they're at and trying to come up with spaces that interest the students and really are tailored to their needs. So, you know, the school is really doing the best that it can. The furnishings are, of course, dated and certainly don't encourage collaborative and project-based learning. Squeaky desks that are fixed to the chairs, not much flexibility there. The hard surfaces, grid ceilings, dated tile, all really reinforce that institutional feel. And of course, there are some spaces like the space that you're in right now with lack of natural light or appropriate ventilation. On the outside of the building, again, structurally, it's in pretty good shape, but there are, of course, signs of deteriorating finishes. The exterior sheet cladding, this is above the auxiliary gym, is in very poor condition. There are some areas where brick spalling is evident, particularly at the corners of the building, which is to be expected. And then there's one area, this is at the east end of the classroom, northeast end of the classroom wing, where there are some, evidence of that brick moving over time. The original exterior windows were much larger than what they are today. They were enclosed with an ELHS system, which was, popular as an energy savings measure. That stands for Exterior Insulation and Finish System. It's basically a rigid insulation and then a stucco applied to the outside of it that went right over the windows. So it leaves you this very, very narrow band of windows at the bottom that's kind of at the perfectly wrong height for views. And on the second floor, you're looking out on the roof instead of to the sky or trees. The roof is in poor shape, has a history of leaks. I think the thing that struck us the most as we were able to walk around on it was how low the flashing is to the adjacent walls. And so we imagine that that's probably a pretty consistent source of the problem. You can imagine, 18 inches of snow on this roof, that's going right into the brick adjacent. In terms of the interior, again, to be expected of a school of this age, there's a lot of lack of compliance with Massachusetts Access Board or ADA. This is showing a typical classroom door, and unfortunately, you're supposed to have a 18-inch pole clearance, and right now it's more like 11 inches. And again, everything is so rigid with that glazed brick that would be something that would be very, very hard to change in the future to make compliant. Science facilities are outdated. This was a sink in the chemistry room that's been kind of decommissioned. You can see the blinds pulled in classrooms, and again, that's glare and heat coming in through those windows, doing the best they can to modify the temperature inside. Deteriorating floor finishes are, of course, common. The bathrooms, this was interesting, bathrooms down at the far end of the classroom wing have really been abandoned since they can't be successfully monitored by the staff. And there were a host of kind of plumbing issues with those abandoned bathrooms. Again, the small band of windows, major public spaces lacking technology. This was a picture, I don't know how many folks have been down in the pool basement under the pool, but there is, it's just a pool basement, so it's just a very, utilitarian space, but there are some issues with water infiltration coming in from the outdoor doors there. I'm going to pass it over to Helen to talk about some of the MEP. Are there any questions on the architectural kind of existing conditions of the building?
Will we talk about whether things are potentially worth saving based on this assessment? Specifically the auditorium, the main gymnasium. I know it's one of the designs that's a renovation addition on the next slides. Are we going to talk about that more?
We will, and I also want to, as we take this slight pause, to reiterate that whether or not you end up with an addition renovation scheme, MSBA requires us to study what it would take to just upgrade this building to code. And so, and that is for your information to understand that just keeping the building as it is, you know, over time, you're going to have to continue to upgrade it, right? So understanding what it would take to do that is part of this process. And you'd also do it for an ad reno.
Along those lines, you look at that first picture where it's lack of compliance in the doors. That would mean we'd have to change every door in the building.
Unless we get some exception, which we sometimes can get for existing conditions, yes. That's, and again, to price that, we need to put a number on this for understanding, you know, comparative purposes. Then we'd assume that, yes, we'd have to do that.
Ellen, is it fair to say that getting an architectural or a code variance on a school project is typically more difficult than it would be on something else?
I would say yes. I don't know, Christian, you have an opinion on that?
We ran into this exact same issue on a 1912 historic building, and we were able to get a variance in that condition, but I think, you know, it was a significant historical building on the National Register. I think it'd be a lot harder for this type of a school.
Right.
Again, I think as Helen said, it's good information to have. It's helpful. You know, it's a requirement of the MSBA, but looking behind the requirement and why they require it. One, it really helps force the architects and the school building committee to really think about what portions of this building are worth saving. Are there any? If we could do an ad reno, what makes the most sense to save? And so we'll do our best doing that. And then I think in the long run, it also helps, you know, illustrate to the public on why we chose to go the path that eventually, you know, you guys will direct us to proceed in. So all part of the process.
Yeah.
All right, should we move into the systems? This will surprise Bruce and Joe, not at all. And well, probably most of you. So our engineers did MEP and fire protection did go through. Certainly if you have any questions, I can direct them back to the engineers. I'm an architect. But in summary, electrically, outdoor utility transformer and main distribution panel are in good operational condition, but the end of their, pretty much the end of their 50-year life expectancy. Main distribution panel feeding the 65 building is in poor condition and beyond life expectancy. Distribution panels similarly poor condition and beyond life expectancy. And, you know, maybe more critically, there is no emergency generator on the site. Go to the next question. Moving inside, thinking about electrical receptacles, yes, there are many and they are operational, but they are also at the end of their lives. There are too few, which we heard repeatedly from every single person we talked to in the programming. In science and kitchen, do not have the code required, you know, GFI rated outlets. In general, lighting illumination is sufficient. It's fine, but there's a real lack of control. So it's kind of like on or off. So in current practice, we like to have a little more control and modulation. And but on the good front, fire alarm system is in good operational condition. Mechanically, pretty much most of the equipment has exceeded its life expectancy. I think it's also important to note that the boilers, while newer, are distributed, right? So again, this makes it more difficult for maintenance, for just keeping track. Hot water pumps and piping are end of useful life, require replacement. Where there is limited air conditioning, those also require replacement, and really there is no comprehensive air conditioning, which is the more notable part. Our mechanical engineer also noted the existence of the underground fuel oil tanks. So obviously you can't get underground to see the condition, but something we'll keep track of as we consider projects here. And again, moving inside, really much this entire list. The summary is they are all the end of their useful lives and require replacement. I think the pictures speak loudly. UVs, the thin tube radiation, air systems equipment, fume hoods, and HV units and exhaust fans.
Ellen, I have a question, but it might be for Bruce and Joe.
Yep.
So these localized boilers that are throughout the building, presumably there's no redundancy, right? So if one of them goes down, you lose whatever that feeds.
No, they all are redundant, so there's two boilers in boiler room 2. Obviously, one acts as a redundant to the other.
Okay.
And then subsequently in boiler room 1, it's the same thing. So I believe there's 3. Is there 3 in boiler room 1? It's been a while.
Yep. Okay.
And obviously based on outdoor air set points and everything else. First one will come on until it can't meet the what is needed to heat the building, and then the next one comes on subsequently. All 3 if they need be, and typically that is until it's minus 10 or 20 degrees outside. So we do have a little bit of redundancy.
All the pumps have redundant, they're redundant pumps on everything also. Every zone has 2 pumps.
And then moving into plumbing and fire protection. So I think you saw in some of the pictures Christian also shared, plumbing fixtures, require updating for efficiency. Also condition, sanitary and vent piping are beyond their lifespan. The storm piping, more visible, appears original, and there's no overflow or secondary drainage. Domestic hot water heaters, fair condition, but heaters in several locations are not operational. Domestic water piping is outdated, insulation intermittent, and needs attention. 2 natural gas entrances are in fair condition. Compressed air, equipment, and piping are approaching their useful lives, but most importantly here, there is no fire protection system, no sprinkler system. So that would certainly need to be addressed in an addition renovation project. Questions on MEP Systems?
On the plumbing system, this is basically just what we could see, right? We have no idea. Well, we do know when we back up, we have those issues, which I think you highlighted in terms of limited gravity in terms of sloping. So, I mean, those are things that we really don't know yet.
That's right,
We
yeah.
know about the electrical, we know about the roof. Plumbing's sort of, we know as we go.
That's right. Now, so should you go in the direction of an addition renovation, we do, more investigative work to get, some scoping done to see, see if we could determine the condition of pipes. But it's a good point. You can only, see what you can see.
I do have one comment to make about the USTs. Those were replaced, and Joe, I can't remember the date, 2011, 2012. Both underground storage tanks were replaced, one 20,000 gallon and one 10,000 gallon unit, all the piping, the root system, everything that goes along with it. Was it that?
10 or 11.
Great. No possible.
How long did those last?
30 years or
We're not even-
regulations change.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not even using them.
Basically,
More the latter.
Yeah. Right now, we're not even using those, right?
Not yet.
That's another redundant system, obviously based on, obviously the commodities, the markets and everything else.
Okay. Great. We move into the next topic area.
Communications update with item number 4. Is that Ben, is that you or is that a
Well,
combination?
We're still
There's
in
still-
this
I'm sorry.
topic area.
I'm sorry,
I meant within. Are we okay on time, actually? Because-
Yeah,
All right,
we're doing well.
okay. All right, good. All right, I think we're switching over to Dory.
Sure. So I'm going to,
Okay.
hi, can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. All right. I'm going to just quickly reference. I think most of you are already participating, so you've already been witnessing our visioning sessions. So we've now had 2 visioning workshops led by New Vista, and both have been pretty productive. We've gotten some really great information, and we're constantly sharing information back. They build on each other, but even though they build on each other, there's still room to participate if there are faculty who'd like to join. The real priority of those is to develop our educational background for the project, because again, the district has the responsibility of writing an ed plan for the proposed project this summer, and this is helping the design team understand that plan, as well as helping the administration hear from the faculty in looking towards the future. We also held the public forum, which was held in the auditorium. We had what felt like about 45 people in the room and another 45 or so on Zoom. So hybrid is a way of spreading you out. It's a big space, so that makes it feel like a small number, but that's a pretty good number for a very first effort. And as we've said, there will be many public forums. The reason why this one's important is because it's a chance to hear people's aspirations. I think we'll talk a little bit more about communications further on and what other avenues we might want to pursue to continue to gather input from the community beyond just these initial visioning sessions. So we'll talk about that more further on, I think. Christian. Next slide. So some of the takeaways that I want to share, we're really breaking it down into 3 different bundles of content. We talked about in all these sessions, educational priorities, architectural priorities for the project, and community priorities. Again, as Eric talked about, the site being such a community park, in a sense, community has a huge role in this project in general, but also because of the history of the building serving other uses in addition to educational. So it's a pretty complex program, we know already, based on the variety of goals for what the building facility is serving. In our conversations, though, just to talk about education, what we are hearing consistently is that while the school has a robust, rigorous core curriculum, the volume of electives is part of the school's success, part of what keeps students happy to be engaged in the school, and gives the whole academic curriculum a lot of vibrancy. And so it does seem to serve the district's priorities academically. We hear a lot from everyone about wanting to keep that sense of joy in learning, and we've probed a little bit to see what that means. But essentially what we hear consistently is the idea of students learning in a variety of different ways, not just in the rote sitting in a desk methodologies of the old, but rather more engaged ways, and keeping that sense of empowerment in students' learning. We've heard from people about the desire for the curriculum to focus on being sure students are prepared for the future mindset, and also globally competitive, able to handle the economies ahead. We've also heard a lot about the need for both mental health and social support for students, as well as academic support. That particularly coming out of COVID, the school's done so much to invest in social emotional learning, and wants to have the future program of the school really support and value all learners and value them where they are. There's emphasis on music, art, and movement. By movement, I mean PE. The school has a remarkably strong phys ed program that's really varied, and has many different components, and actively engages almost the entire population, which is very impressive for a high school. There's a need expressed throughout for more collaborative spaces, more hands-on learning, particularly STEM and STEAM, which continues to rise as we talk to fairly high location in our priority list for people. As I mentioned, universal design for learning, students having barriers to their interests and learning removed, and that mental health support. We see that echoed in the discussion of architecture, but as you can imagine, people also talk in very practical terms about the need for things that are very well known: better lab space, better, flexibility in classrooms, the need for storage. We hear a lot about those issues that we're already aware of, but I think the issues that are emerging as a need for spaces that really sort of center student learning outside of the classroom, since that's something that's actively happening in the school, but it happens in hidden away ways. So making more spaces for students to learn actively with each other in adjacent to classrooms or in shared spaces. The idea of a centered commons is emerging as a conversation topic based on some challenge of the existing school. A general desire for the school to be planned in a way that's enduring, and then addressing all these weaknesses that we're aware of: the small media center, a need for an updated auditorium that serves multiple purposes, an updated cafeteria that serves multiple interests, and improvements in wayfinding, safety, and learning happening everywhere, both inside and outside the school. And then I think our list of issues for the community has not changed from day one, really. The district was very clear that districts have a long time to pile up this set of community goals. So the community pool has been an interest all along. The idea of continuing the recreational use, continuing ELHS location here, but then also an awareness of the value of the auditorium and the room you're in for community meeting space, that we continue to honor that and address that in any designs. And then a rising interest in discussions about both traffic pattern and relationship to the community beyond the school site, sustainability, and intergenerational learning at the school, the potential for expanded learning after hours, and making the school, while it's already a community space, more welcoming of community. Again, we'll keep reporting back as we gather this input, and ultimately there'll be a comprehensive report on the takeaways. Christian? So just moving into programming a little bit, we can't spend as much time today as we'd like on programming, because we really want to get your discussion going on the siting of our potential new construction options as a part of the PDP study. But we did want to gradually expand everybody's vocabulary and knowledge of the building. So we've done some analysis and thoroughly measured the school and assessed the classrooms. And we have a little bit of information we want to share today. The first thing here is that the actual gross square footage of the school is different than was originally reported in the RFQ for this project. And I think it's simply because the courtyards were not removed from that amount. So it's actually 185,614 gross square feet of actively used program space. That is includes in red all those spaces that are 5% or more under current Mass School Building Authority size expectations for a high school of 800 students. And that when you see it, this is no surprise, I imagine, that the classrooms, which average, if you total them all up, they actually vary in size quite a bit. But if you average the classrooms, they're about roughly around 775 square feet per room. And the MSBA, it's important to understand, they're committed to supporting the most educationally critical parts of the project, classrooms being a high priority. The MSBA today generally looks to see new classrooms designed at 850 to 950 square feet. They, in fact, wouldn't even support reimbursing a classroom that's under 825. So all of these classrooms are considered undersized because of the volume of activity now in a classroom and changing expectations for teaching. So that gives you a sense of critical concern from a state educational perspective as to where the priorities should be here on the project. We also know that for this size of school, the gymnasium is undersized. In the admin, you see a lot of red there. I'd say as a whole program, it's not that bad, but it's the individual spaces and how they lay out. So that's really simply a reconfiguration issue. Special education, the school is about where we would expect to be for a school this size. But again, part of it is about adapting to specific spaces. So where those spaces are is something that would be addressed in any project, I think. Any questions about this, this quite simple space analysis before we move on? Christian, you want to go next slide? So this is just, we're going to talk a lot more about programming at the next meeting. But what I thought it might be helpful to do now that we've been in the building and done measurements and compared what the school currently has to the MSBA's expectations for a new school today for 800 students, is to give you some sense how those expectations stack out with what you have. And it's nothing to be critically concerned about. It's helpful to understand that being part of the MSBA project stream means that you're not just picking and designing the spaces per your desire and needs, but also with a mindfulness to what the MSBA considers important and what they're willing to reimburse financially. So that tells you something. And their commitment to these spaces is, again, based on the desire the state has to support the educational program of the school, and also a great deal of study that's gone into prioritizing certain types of spaces. So for instance, the existing school has 37 classrooms. The MSBA nowadays would expect a school of this size to have 27 classrooms, but classrooms would be larger. So that's the difference philosophically between education today, where classrooms are not owned by every teacher. And to some degree, the schools had that many classrooms because of time, right? Even if enrollment has declined, it has kept the classrooms that existed and utilized them by spreading teachers out. Whereas building new, you would not be expected to have a lower utilization rate of those classrooms. You would expect a higher utilization rate of fewer classrooms with more space within them. The MSBA, though, would like to see schools implement planning rooms. They could be rooms of 100 to 150 square feet, regularly spaced throughout the school, to allow more coordination of teaching and more collaboration. The MSBA implements space about 1,000 square feet for a school this size that can be broken up in a variety of ways as breakout rooms for students to meet in small groups near the classroom. So you can pull students out for special projects, for meetings, and have them inside of the classroom, but able to work a little bit more independently at times. Currently, the school has no planning rooms and no breakout rooms. By planning rooms, I'm not talking a large conference room, but really actually smaller meeting rooms. The school currently has, as we all know, undersized labs, and even the STEM spaces are undersized relative to what MSBA expects to see. The standard for an MSBA project is 1,400 square foot labs, with each having its own 200 square foot prep room. And East Long Meadow is interesting. It was the classroom, a lab, and a prep room, and the classroom and lab are smaller. So in some ways, some of that space is there, but it's broken up in a way that limits flexibility. The gymnasium is undersized at about 8,000 some square feet. And the allotment for a school of this size in PE total is 12,000 square feet plus alt PE space plus a number of other spaces, office spaces. It can be tricky. I'd say that what we're seeing is that the program at East Long Meadow also has a lot of staff spaces. And that's something we'll have to negotiate with the MSBA further to try and include in the reimbursement because you have a very robust PE program. The media center is undersized. I think everyone's aware of that. The auditorium is, technically speaking, to a new school today, considered oversized in that it is 7,298 square feet. It seats, I believe, about 1,000 people, 900 maybe. That's larger than the typical MSBA auditorium, which is designed to seat, I believe it's 60% of your school population. So the thinking is you're never going to have everybody there at once. There's a lot of reasons why students, especially nowadays when students are doing dual enrollment programs or going to offsite locations, that you never actually have all of your student body sitting together at one time. And even if you did, you could potentially do that in two meetings instead of one. And that the rest of the time, there's a lot of space there that's being underutilized. So the MSBA is typically assuming that you're building a more multi-purpose but smaller auditorium. And that's something that the district, as we talked about, we can discuss in terms of a renovation option and new construction options and talk about what that means. It doesn't mean that you couldn't choose to have a large auditorium new or renovated. It just means MSBA's commitment to supporting it is not as generous as you would like, because they basically will only meet what they offer to that point. The difference is made up for by the community. The district has oversized art rooms. Really, they were repurposed rooms, so it's understandable that they're oversized. And it's relatively even as a whole category within medical and administrative. And the school has an abundant amount of storage space, but it's spread out all through the building in a variety of spaces, some of which are quite full of dusty old books. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out over time. I think some of that is just, again, space that became available and became storage. Dining is a little bit larger than is typical for a new school. That's often the case. The MSBA is a bit stingy on cafeteria space, to be honest, and many districts debate that and decide. It depends on how you choose to structure your day, whether you have 3 seatings or 2 seatings and how that works. I think 7,500 square feet could work in this district, depending on how it's organized. And relatively speaking, even on administration to the MSBA guidelines. Again, the guidelines do not mean that this is a school that you're going to get, is what they say. It's just this is their participation in the project financially. There's also a lot of space that is negotiated, a part of the special education program in particular. I didn't mention here because that's a little bit more fluid, and that gets supported differently through an understanding of your needs as a district. And then spaces that are not listed as a part of the educational program are those things that we see as outside of the educational program that we've discussed, like the pool, the community room, ELHS, administrative offices, district offices. Those we count as other, and they would be on top of the educational program and would be fully on the district to financially support. Again, we'll get into this in a lot more detail next week, but I wanted to just start the process of getting you familiar with how we're looking at it and what we're seeing. Christian, next slide. So the key takeaways here, and I'd like to open up for some questions after this, and these are just some general thoughts really from our side. We do anticipate that the school will exceed MSBA guidelines in core academic, PE, and special education categories, and that those may very well be reimbursed. For instance, the MSBA does not realize that you have 2 health classes. Health classes are a DESE requirement. So even though they don't include that in their 27 classrooms, we'll request those additional classrooms. So in other words, what you're seeing in the MSBA core expectation in core academic, PE, and special ed, we fully expect you will exceed because you already are. And because you are, we'll be able to communicate that to the MSBA, and we believe we'll be able to win the MSBA's support for additional reimbursement to support those spaces. There are areas that we feel, based on your use and MSBA guidelines, we should adhere as closely as possible to the MSBA's recommended sizes, because it will, in the new construction particularly, obviously, because it will maximize your reimbursement. So the areas that we feel you can work within their guidelines quite easily are the media center, the art spaces, the auditorium, voc tech, dining, admin, medical, and custodial. Custodial can be tricky, but we would certainly start at that point, aiming for that. Auditorium would be the area where the largest delta is between what you have and what you might have. So we certainly want to discuss that further. But in terms of vocational tech spaces, they generously offer and would reimburse 5 1,400 square foot studio spaces. And that actually aligns with your programs well. So the types of spaces that would be included would be your culinary arts classroom, your engineering classroom, your graphic arts classroom, et cetera. So those hands-on learning spaces that you're already using, robotics, potentially video from LCAT. So we think that you have a lot of potential there. And then we assume that we have a very large amount of non-reimbursed community space in this project based on these items that we discussed. So the result we foresee at the moment that we're aiming for a school that at the moment, based on the wish list, would exceed the size of the current school. Partly because MSBA expects larger classrooms, partly because there's a lot of community desire for community spaces in the school. And we'll look at this with in a granular level at the leadership team meeting this week and come with a detailed program for you to look at and with some specific recommendations. But we wanted to open up and find out if this raised, and this in the visioning conversations have raised any specific thoughts for the committee that we should be hearing at this point.
So in terms of the visioning session, arts came up a lot, I thought, as well as we know physical activity, physical education is big in the school already. We're talking about numbers, size, square footage, auditorium size at 800 plus now would go down to 640. That's a substantial cut. Is it count against us if we were to keep the auditorium, keep the current gymnasium, add a new gymnasium as the main, so the second one would be big? Does that count against our 12,000 square feet for the gym and also for a comprehensive renovation on the auditorium? It's because it's that big. Are we punished for comprehensive renovation in terms of our reimbursement rate?
So it's pretty interesting how this works. Renovating gains you additional reimbursement from the MSBA in the overall project. So it's not simply at the auditorium, but the overall helps you because you're keeping the auditorium and that's larger. Their commitment to the auditorium continues to be for the square footage that they would support for a new school. So they will not support all of the space within the auditorium, but elsewhere they reward you for renovation as a whole. So that's a little tricky. With the gymnasium, your specific question, could you keep that gym, add a new gym, have the MSBA reimburse only the new gym? They're ultimately just adding up all of that program. So if you added a 12,000 square foot gym and you had an 8,000, to them, that's 20,000. They're still only going to support the 12,000. So all of that extra square footage, whether it be new or renovation, is ultimately probably on the district entirely. So again, we think that we have a little bit of room to justify a little bit larger program in PE because of how actively you're using all of your spaces, how many classes you run at once. You run 3 classes at a time. That needs a certain amount of space. So we think you have a little room here, whether we go with new or renovation. And on the renovation question, while it's tempting to have the space, we started out assuming very strongly that the auditorium and the gymnasium would be the building blocks of a renovation program. And I think we still feel that way. But as you hear all the other conversation about needing to probably view it as a gut rehab, ultimately what you're going to look at is the value of saving those spaces in contrast to what you get for the money you're spending on a renovation to do the gut rehab of that electrical system and the plumbing system, all of which gets a little bit more complicated in a renovation scheme. So it's not simply if just looking at the spatial advantages, it's ultimately tacking it all up together and talking about it.
Just to sum that up, I know of the community there's a want for space, and we use the auditorium. It's full multiple times a year for all sorts of events. So I would hate to cut that in half to thus have smaller events. If we have the existing space and we can do a renovation and still maintain the 800 seats, see value in that, great value, if it's even a cost or not. The gym space, we can always use more gym space. We have a good sized gym already. I saw in the concrete renovation add-on that those 2 spaces are there. So I'm intrigued by that because I think that's a potential viable option. I had always thought complete new structure, but I think those 2 specific spaces, as well as this structure here, I don't know if the work fits into it, but because we won't have LCAT reimbursement, we won't have central office reimbursement, is it worth building or leaving this structure, this rectangle? paying with a building. As
Right.
part of it.
And that's exactly the same thinking we're going through and looking at these options and how to play out, potentially multiple renovation options if it makes sense to, and trying to weigh. And you'll see today what we want to focus on is looking a little bit at the site at the larger level so that we can actually talk about the other implications of renovation and new construction relative to the site as a whole and phasing as a whole. And I think you'll find that starts to broaden the number of questions that we have to ask along the way. So
I think it's important too to note that you can achieve those aims, have the larger auditorium in a new build as well. It's just you need to remember that that excess
only
square
gonna
footage
reimburse,
would
yeah.
fall out of
Yeah.
the participation category. So maybe be thinking about it again as making that wish list of the things you really want, and then we can test it against where it fits better rather than thinking keep this and build
Yeah.
around it.
We'll have a cost analysis of that, of the comprehensive renovation specifically to those two structures fitting into a reno new construction project. Like
At
the
this,
one
yeah.
coming up.
At this, yes, well, that's.
Not yet,
that's
but at
more
some
about
point.
Yes, we
Okay.
will, and, at this phase though, they very much are square footage costs, kind of based on an average square foot as opposed to a detailed estimate, but it'll still provide you with a really good idea.
Okay, yeah.
We also had some discussion of, as you look at sort of how you might anticipate or work with them within the MSBA guidelines of working LCAT back into possible reimbursement. Because we do connect our curriculum into LCAT programming. If there's a way to do that more, link it more to some of the things we're doing at the middle school, there's a way that maybe that new studio, Greg,
We just
could
built
be.
a new studio.
Yeah.
The
10 years
new
ago,
studio,
yeah.
yeah, so
right.
could possibly be reimbursed. Yeah. Okay. No
Yeah,
worries, Frank.
I'll see you guys.
Yeah, that's right. What we're really looking for as we start the planning process here is trying to show the committee ways in which we can utilize square footage. So for instance, the LCAT is a good example where if we're creating hands-on learning digital video studios for academic purposes that then also support LCAT, that works well. If we create a community room of 1,400 square feet that is also the potential for a room that can actually allow students to meet for other purposes. It's part of the academic program. It would be supported by the MSBA. So we try and look at ways to kind of overlap these to try and make it more efficient, but also to be genuinely from a long-term operational perspective, to be sure that you don't have vast areas of the school that are not used, that you're paying for from an energy and building operation standpoint all the time. So to get more out of the actual commitment to this capital project.
Next slide.
Great, we can move on. As Dory mentioned, I think at the meeting on Thursday, the SLT meeting, we'll dive a little more into detail on some of this stuff. But it's an important thing to get this group to understand because there are, compromises that will need to be made.
So based on what we discussed earlier with the existing conditions kind of assessment, we started to look at, well, where could the building be placed on the site? Okay, and what are the considerations that we have to keep in mind as we start to position a building on the site, and then all of the infrastructure that goes with it. And of course, at this level, just as kind of a broad introduction to this, what are we looking at? We're looking at building placement, how that relates to the site surroundings, and also the features that would likely remain on the site. And then, what's the circulation? What are the opportunities to improve the circulation? And then when you put that all together, what is the impact on the athletic field? Again, Dr. The athletic director did town narrow short of need for athletic field, right? So if you take the program away, that's only hurting things more, and we understand even the fields over at Lennox, they're doing away with those, in lieu of, for solar panels. So again, that's just a further hit to the athletic program. So, next slide, please. Okay. So what we want to do is start, before we get into the options, we want to introduce kind of what are the considerations that we look at. We don't like to use the word constraints because when you say site constraints, that has a negative connotation to it. And when actuality, a lot of times what people call site constraints can actually be site opportunities, right? If you've got wetlands, yes, they have a buffer zone with them, but they're also magnificent stretches of open space that people can learn a lot from, right? So we like to call them site considerations. So right now, just as a broad brush, you can see the existing building in orange, okay? And all in green are the existing athletic fields for different sports. Now, we compiled, for the purposes of this, we have not done a site survey. We took aerial photography from MassGIS, and then we overlaid on top of it some different things like 10-foot topographic contours so you can get a general lay of the land. And then we also overlaid on top of it some MassGIS, mapped wetlands. These aren't flagged wetlands. They're not final. These would all have to be determined. But to give us an idea generally where are the features that we need to respond to. So in purple, you see generally where the wetlands could be, and you could basically lump into the pond at the southeast corner as well. You can consider that one. And then in yellow, you see roughly where a 100-foot buffer would be. And then what we looked at here is, what are the surroundings? We've got surrounding neighborhoods, and on the west side, in general, they have a quiet relationship to this existing site, right? There's athletic fields, but not loading docks, in general, or things right up against the property line. Now, what we do have to consider is the fact that right now, that Norton Street access is used for the service vehicles. So when we think about what levels of traffic and whatnot that we want to send through the Marshall Street neighborhoods, we've got to think about that. And where we site the building, that comes into play. From a topography standpoint, again, Maple Street is a little bit higher. So is the northwest corner of the site, which is actually, I think, one of the most beautiful parts of this site is that soccer field, and then just sloping up to those residences. There's hardly any fences over there. There's just, some interspersed trees, and that's their property line, right? And that's where I think it's houses abutting on a park. That's what gives it that feel. So that's a really beautiful area. But that slope, the reason I bring that up is because that's a pretty substantial slope. And all you have to do is go to the end of Berry Road and look at that hole that's almost dug out there to see how big that slope is. So we want to be a little cautious about proposing much up there just because of the cut requirements that would be involved. Generally, we set the building at elevation 0, so you can see maybe Maple Street's about a floor higher, right, about 10 feet higher. As you move east, it drops down maybe about 5 to 10 feet. These are just rough numbers, right? And then as you go to the south, again, you're dropping a few feet maybe to the wood line, but then if you were to go out to Chestnut Street, it'd be down about 10 feet, maybe about 10 feet more. Parking-wise on this site, we roughly calculated that you have approximately 500 parking spaces on site. But we understand only about 80% of those, especially in the main parking lot, are utilized on a typical day. Now, you get graduation or some large event or something, we understand it may overflow into the St. Michael's parking lot, and my understanding is that you have a good relationship with the people at St. Michael's, and they allow the parking lot. But again, the problem, that's a wonderful thing. But again, when we think of site considerations, 20% of 500 parking spaces is a lot of asphalt pavement, right? It's a lot of stormwater that needs to be managed, So one of the things that you'll see is we looked at more in the neighborhood of 400 parking spaces and what that would require when we develop it. So again, wetlands are an opportunity for outdoor education, but they're also something that need to be considered. The existing neighborhoods, we have to think about noise, we have to think about traffic. And then the parking, we have to think about efficiency, having it close enough to the building, especially with accessibility. Those are the common themes. And of course, the football state, or the existing synthetic turf field and the stadium, we are anticipating removing. And so, how to work this program and that all of those factors into consideration, now we start to look at where could a new building go. Now you can see point blank right in the middle of the site is the existing facility. And we mentioned this a while back, that one of the disappointing things about where this building is located is someone driving by, if they don't know the site well, would not even know that there's this expanse of green space behind this building, because it stretches all the way across that green. And so when we start to look at places to position this building, is there an opportunity, and we point the term, to pull back the curtain on the site, right? And set the building in a place where it's still prominently visible, but so is the rest of the property that people have come to love and enjoy and use for athletic and other events. So when we factor in things like proximity to neighbors, noise, phasing, existing site features to remain, we looked at the northern portion of the site where the existing and spatial constraints too. We looked at the northern part of the site where the existing parking lot is maybe not recommended, simply because it's a little tight on space, especially with the stadium where it is, and be very, very close to those residences. We also looked at the west side, but again, from the west side and the north side too, again, you're close to neighboring residences, and there's also very poor visibility into the site of the building itself, right? On the north end, it'd be tucked around the residences. On the west side, it would also be tucked around those couple of residences on the corner, so the visibility would be. Whereas in green, we start to look at these as preferred sites, and in the two that we're showing here, there's a little bit of play on here. So the south option maybe gives a little bit easier phasing, right? Because we have to start to think about that. If you're going to build a new building and you're going to keep this building in operation until the new one is ready to go online, if in the south you can build that building logistically, it's going to be a lot easier to get all your construction vehicles and whatnot around it while you keep the other one online. Whereas what detracts on that one a little bit is the fact that it is further away from Maple Street. It is tucked back in. It has a greater impact on the existing athletic field. It's going to take more pavement just to get to the school, right, because it's so far back. Whereas in the center of the property, kind of where the building is now, but a little bit off the site, you can have a better relationship to the existing stadium. It's going to be closer to Maple Street, which means your infrastructure to get to the school and park for the school and whatnot is going to be less just simply by proximity. But the phasing is more complicated, right? Because you're going to be closer to your existing building, and maybe certain parts of this building have to go offline while the rest of it is constructed. So these are all considerations. With that said, though, from an initial review, it seemed to us that the two sites in green would probably be more advantageous over the two in red. And again, but we welcome comments on that because you are the people that use this. You're here every day. We're doing this from our experience and simply our observations. So you're here using it every day. So mind you that what you're going to see is going to be options, or I don't even want to call them options, preliminary studies that have been developed in those two green locations. But before we get to those, for a simple code upgrade, and I welcome Christian's input from an architecture perspective, I will just say from a site perspective, not a lot would change from a site perspective other than potentially some want some accessibility upgrades, right? Make sure the parking and the accessible routes and everything meet ADA and AAB requirements. Possibly some circulation improvements to the extent practical. We improve the circulation within the parking lot and whatnot, and possibly some utility upgrades to cure some of those things that was discussed earlier. Christian, I don't know if you want to touch on any of the architecture parts of that.
No, I think that's fair, Eric. I mean, in terms of just the code upgrade, we would try and keep this option to the minimum of really bringing things up to code, replacing aging utilities that must be replaced right this minute, but keeping this as minimal of a scope as possible. typically these end up being quite a high number, a surprisingly high number, just to bring the building back up to code.
So now we get into a little bit more here. So now in the addition renovation, again, we see from a site perspective that, there would be accessibility upgrades. We would look to maybe improve some of the circulation if possible. Same thing, utility upgrades, common theme here. There would be a little bit of a reconfiguration of the athletic fields, right? If there's an addition off the back or whatnot, we would just, whatever's lost, we would look to, replicate that somewhere else. Now, one of the things on all of these options is right now, some of the field orientations are not recommended, right? So for instance, the baseball fields, from home plate to second base, right now they are facing southwest. That's actually opposite of what is recommended. They recommend home plate to second base face east northeast. So any fields that are reimagined on this property, it doesn't always work this way, but we'll look to try to give it the preferred orientation. Same thing with like football fields and soccer fields. They tend to want to run north-south, right, as opposed to east-west. But we've got some fields here that are more in the east-west. So, and again, you can't always do that. It's site-specific, but we would try to the extent but, so in this instance, you can see the area in green. We're not getting super specific into what field would go where at this point, just where the fields would be. The varsity baseball field would probably be lost in a circumstance like this, so we would want to replicate that somewhere else on site and reconfigure things accordingly. And then, Christian, I don't know if you want to chat anything about the architecture on this one.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think this is very preliminary. But as we've discussed this evening, saving the auditorium, saving and adding on to the gym, and then basically new classroom wings to the south.
This would require more of a facade, a renovation of the facade, and the approach would look different in something like this. Yeah. We won't look at the existing building as it is today. Generally. Yeah.
We could.
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear that.
Yeah,
that was addressed to me.
That could be part of the design. You're saying we wouldn't necessarily need to look at this facade. We could, a renovation of facade.
It looks like the courtyard is cut open and the administrative offices are taken out so that the entrance, the red triangle, is set further back, which I really like this. I know it's preliminary, but this is kind of what I was talking about. And even an additional gymnasium wing off the east side, getting us closer to the fields, perhaps. I know
Right.
discussion, but I'm intrigued by this. I am.
One thing we wanted to draw attention to on the idea of an ad renovation that is part of the calculation is what it means to build new classrooms and take away the old classrooms. So how do you do the renovation? We have to calculate in the impact of construction happening while you're trying to maintain operations of the school. So sometimes that can create, as a part of this assessment of all opportunities, we need to kind of factor in the cost of the downtime for renovation or the phasing of the work, or the possibility of what we call swing space, but bringing in temporary modulars. So that's also part of really what we're trying to show here, is thinking about the sequence of the work as well as the end results.
One nice feature, as we start to get into these, newer construction type schemes here, is that you can start to see, we start to try to perforate the building a little bit and start to draw the open space in, right? And that gives opportunities for outdoor classrooms where you don't need a garage door and a reinforced floor to get, to get your mower through to them. They're open, they're not completely surrounded by four walls. And it also helps to, turn the building from this big mass, right, that sits on the site and actually start to bring the site into the building. It makes the building have visually a lower impact on the site itself. So now we'll get into these more new construction site studies. So what we're going to do first is focus on two potential studies for a central location, what we're calling it. So this is in proximity to where the building is today. So the building you see is basically sited between the existing building and the stadium itself. And then what we started to look at is how can we separate bus and vehicular traffic, right? And that's going to be a common theme through all these. So you can see in this scheme, we looked at, okay, well, maybe the horseshoe could go away. Maybe we could have a four-way intersection at Melwood, right? And come through the center of the green, have buses or parents drop off at the front of the school, and either buses or parents separated on the opposite side using the northeast entrance. You can start to see the separation of bus circulation and parent circulation. And there's logistics that go into that. But one of the benefits to this type of approach is you can see, number one, the building is pulled away to reveal that beautiful open space that you have existing. And it's an option that sort of takes advantage of a pinch point in the site, right? Where that south piece from Lennox Industrial Tools, it pokes in a little bit near the pond, right? And then with those existing residences, their property line, there's a little bit of a compression to the site there. Siting the building there actually allows you to maintain the largest swath of open space that's at a good proportion for athletic fields, right? Still has a little bit of an odd shape, but it's in a pretty good proportion. And then, you know, what we also start to look at by that, the bold black dashed line is right now, again, the town does not have the land to make a connection to Chestnut Street. But what if it did? You know, and that's an opportunity you see in that black dash line to show, okay, well, maybe there could be a pass-through that either connects to the existing driveway at Excel Dryer and Silverson. And then we've got a couple of different options for potentially how that could work. But this was just an initial thought, since they already have a driveway that practically extends all the way back to their northern property line, the school's southern property line. So again, you can just see, you know, the school would front on the green space. So when everybody arrives at the school, their view would be of the green space. We would probably do away with the vehicular connection from Norton Street and potentially turn that into just a parking lot at the end with pedestrian access from Norton Street and Berry Road to the high school building. And, you know, again, preserve the stadium, put the building close to the stadium for, you know, just be efficient for athlete access, trainer access, things like that. So you can start to see these related. An alternative to that would be, in effect, placing the building behind the existing building, creating a large open green space up at the front of the building, keeping the main parking field in a sense where it is today, repositioning some of the athletic fields around to facilitate this. But again, you know, some of the benefits of this, right? The building's close to the stadium. There's an opportunity to create an even greater green space with even possibly an athletic field in front of the building. We're separating circulation, right? In this sequence of events, you probably have the buses come in across from Melwood, right? They would use that internal loop, and then potentially we could do parent drop-off along the back of the building. Now, I will say, one question that may come up is, you know, do we need 360-degree access around the building? And the answer to that is some towns require it, some towns don't. We're working on some projects right now where the programming of the school or the emergency response wants 360-degree access. And we would certainly, you know, we want to get the feedback from your police department, from your fire department to determine if that's desired here. But we have a lot of communities that are saying, give it to us on 50% of the side, or even just one side in general, you know, and that's all we need. So it's really just going to be up to the town what you would like for access around the building and what emergency response would be. But you can start to see how an effort like this would start to organize the traffic a little bit better, right? If parents came in that loop around the building, they could be held there until the buses are released back out to Maple Road. and there's really no opportunity for them to cut the line, so to speak. And we could start to play with one-way circulation around the loop, right? There's other advantages to that. For the most part, I believe all of these options would generally give you the same, and again, we'd have to work out the details of it, but they would generally give you the same athletic field program. We have not yet seen an opportunity to really bring the softball back unless there was, some of either the practice fields or soccer fields were sacrificed. So this in effect would give you that same program back. But again, it's the central site. You can see the pavement is more efficient, and it doesn't reach out all the way to the southern part of the site. Now, as we look at options for the rear of the site, again, this would give us an opportunity to add a lot more green space fronting the building. It would be set back. So again, phasing would be a little bit simpler. In an option like this, we would probably look to preserve the service access for using Norden Street simply because of the proximity to the building. So that would probably stay the same. Wouldn't introduce any other traffic, though, other than potentially in an effort to separate the student parking from the faculty parking, perhaps Norden Street could be used for faculty and staff. We talked to Frank, when we visited the site back at the end of May, and I know there's a sensitivity to not bringing too much traffic through the Marshall Street neighborhoods, especially traffic that's more difficult to monitor, like students. It's a little bit more unpredictable. But if there's fewer cars and it's more adult traffic, it might be a little bit more appealing to the neighborhood, potentially. Maybe not, but it's something to consider. So maybe a dedicated staff parking lot right behind the building or to the side of the building, whereas we keep the students maybe more in front, just to provide that separation. And you can see again here, maybe in this one, the buses can use that loop in front of the building, and maybe parents can use that outer loop again, so that they can come and go and they're not waiting for the buses. So again, these are just highlights. A lot of them cover the same basic principles. So that's more thinking about as we kind of analyzed how the site is used today, and we talked to the staff about how the site's being used. We understand that even though there are maybe 12 to 14 buses daily, which takes up a lot of space. 12 to 14 buses lined up takes a lot of space. There's not that many kids proportionally using the school buses that are getting dropped off by school buses. It's mostly middle school kids that are using buses. So maybe a smaller little bow, right, or a little horseshoe for the buses. Whereas you're getting a lot more parent drop off, students using their own cars. We see that line backed up in the main parking lot today. So maybe a larger bow, a bigger bow or a larger arc that could be used for the parent drop off.
That's the outer one?
Yeah. Again, all this is very preliminary. If there was a discussion, say, well, maybe we want the school buses, since they don't service as many kids for our school, maybe we want the school buses out a little bit further and the parents a little bit closer. Certainly there's flexibility in studies to and this is one further option that, again, so this would run the building a little bit more north-south, fit it more to the eastern property line. Again, have it face out on the open spaces, a little bit more and towards the neighborhoods of Norden Street. Get the building away. This option really gets the building as far away from the residential neighbors that you see. It gets a little close to some of the Lori Lane residences, but for the most part, it keeps the building pretty far away. A dedicated bus loop in the front, and then again, looking at maybe, for 360-degree access, which the town may be interested in, sending the parents around the back. The only thing we always say with 360-degree access is it's more convenient. So, this school again, I don't know, it has the feeling in some ways of a park building because of its because of its communal ties, all the things that happen here, right? And there's some we haven't, even the fact that the East Long Meadow Marlins use the pool, right? It's all these community groups that use it for so many different reasons that we almost think of it as a park building. Park buildings don't usually have ring roads around the whole thing, right? They're strategically placed and the park comes into them and they become a hub, right? And so if we think about it that way, maybe there's a desire to, limit the amount of pavement and bring more of the green into the building. So again, we felt it was important to show you both. Now in this option too, we have a more, and again, it's not required for this scheme. You could certainly just round off the ring road, but we started to look at, okay, over at Excel Dryer, if you really get on the ground and you look into that property, yes, they have a driveway there, but they have parking off of it. And if we don't want that serving as a driveway, then would there be an opportunity to occupy the west side of their property, right where it's wooded, and run some type of an access road through that would get you your Chestnut Street access? Of course, the consideration there is, you've got an industrial building and then you've got a neighborhood and you've got this wooded buffer, right? And so if the road goes through that, well, there goes the wooded buffer, right? And a lot of times you want that separation between industrial and residential activity. However, if this was a strong enough desire, that's another opportunity. We did not see it as recommended to propose making a connection to Lori Lane, simply because that's a very small residential road, and at that point, you probably might as well just use the Norton Street access that you already have rather than going through that, because then you're just going to be sending people through the Market Street neighborhood. But again, it's another option. This is the west side of Excel Dryer, if that were possible, but you don't need to do that in this instance. And again, just for pedestrian connections, because we always like to think about those, is there an opportunity, there's wetlands out there, but is there an opportunity maybe along the northern fringes to make a connection for kids through the woodland to the Redstone Rail Trail? Yeah, which, my son and his grandparents, I can't tell you how many times growing up they took him in his stroller up and down that rail trail. It's beautiful. So, and it'd be a safer way to get into the site than what I used to do, which was cutting through the woods through the backup land. So, there's some great opportunities. And this just, because I've been rambling on, but if just this will show them all kind of in one slide, just in case there's any questions.
Questions and discussion, and this is based on a 2-story building, or are we looking at a 2 and 3 design team? Clarification.
The intent here is to focus on the site circulation issues, and that's why we kept the same footprint. Ignore the building entirely. It's really more about the positioning of the building than about the building at this point.
Yeah, I will say other things to note, just the continuity of green space that you gain in some versus others, where we start to bifurcate it with circulation, even the amount of green space that you get, open space, if it's field or additional landscape typologies, and then connectivities to the fabric of the neighborhood and the bike path that you can gain some and situate themselves well, and others less so. But again, very early studies, all of them are feasible, just pros and cons to each one.
I think another thing to mention to the committee is that our what we'll be doing in this phase is just determining how many options to price as concepts. So we wanted to explore the location of a new building in order to get their feedback on whether or not certain ideas should be explored or not. And none of these represent a final design. They all represent different ideas that we're curious to hear the committee's response to in terms of connection or non-connection off the site. and relationships of parent versus bus, et cetera. So think of them more as a palette of ideas to help us narrow.
do have one comment to make. As far as the chestnut access, I would shy away from that. The only reason being is because of the Lennox, or Monday getting out in the afternoons. I'm constantly getting calls from residents because they're not getting through the end of Chestnut Street at the lights there. Joe's in the office, he hears it constantly. And so, like you said, there's traffic issues already on Chestnut.
I don't know that we need the 300-degree access. I like the idea of park concept, with less intrusiveness of vehicles. I think there are certainly times we use parking to its fullest extent as it is. With the July parade, that big stretch out front is right where we line everybody up every year. It's important in this town to have somewhere to do that. So I think we need a big parking area as we have, or if we replenish it somewhere else. Certainly segregating the buses from the drop-off makes a whole lot of sense to me if it's possible. And, number 5 is pretty far away from the parking area. So, and number 4 is far. Yeah, which is fine. I mean, I think now it's kind of far. People would think of it as far. So to put it further away doesn't feel like we should do it. I mean, I can walk it. I'm just saying in general.
Yeah, no, I agree.
People are always racing to get into the building.
I like the idea of separating staff parking and student parking. Although the red line was mine 20 years ago. So, you know, and I policed it. I was out there. Just for the record.
So to that point, something like 6 might make sense without the 365 and without the testing access. Is that a possibility that the 365 and without it still going to pay stop exit?
Do we know? We haven't had police and fire in our visioning. They've been invited, but they haven't had a chance to. I don't know if that's something that they would think that they need. Yeah. Sure. 360. Truth be told, Bruce and Joe, tell me if I'm wrong, DPW uses our walking paths all the way around. You know, they plow those so that we have access, you know, for walking. So I mean, if we had durable sidewalks, it's less asphalt, but if we have durable sidewalks, you can get vehicles. As we do graduation, we have vehicles that are traveling on the sidewalk basically now.
Yeah, right. And the BFPs that I use and things like that for stormwater. I eliminated some of the
That's helpful.
impervious surface.
Yeah.
It's not a little more real asphalt.
Do gravel.
Certainly, we heard at the last business, seeing what pulling the building back further from the look like. Do you have any reaction seeing how that works out?
I think 5 is back in the barn. I know West Springfield has more of that, which is fine. I wouldn't have thought that, but it works. So I don't think it's impossible, personally. As long as, and I would say the point that we don't lose any green space compared to now. We are good.
Sorry, just because it's a little hard to hear. To reiterate that point, keep and maintain the athletic program and field space that you all have currently.
To the extent possible.
And also, improving the parking accessibility for athletic events. You may have seen when we have events out in Lukeback Fields, this is all the parking we have. That fills up rapidly. So certainly reallocating spaces, west side and south.
Design parking lots, obviously, asphalt and with some gravel and things like that, so it's not being utilized on a daily basis. You have that maintenance, and you need to utilize that space as well.
Gravel parking can be a little bit challenging only from a stormwater perspective, and also from a maintenance perspective. When it gets plowed, it tends to get. We've definitely used, porous asphalt, things of that, porous pavements. Some cities and towns are concerned about the maintenance, so we would want to make sure that we articulate what the maintenance requirements would be, because then if they're not maintained properly, then they're not functioning, and you lose that PMP. But again, this is, we're right at the beginning of this, so all suggestions are welcome, and we're happy to look at these different surfacing types and different opportunities and see what the district and the DPW are comfortable with in terms of maintenance and program for it.
None of these cooperations have this based on where they are.
They are challenging. So in the ad reno, we sort of felt that was probably the most plausible opportunity to keep them where they are. But there's also some challenges with those particular tennis courts and the way they're configured. Because right now they're stacked. You've got 3 and then you've got 3. And then when a ball goes over the fence, it goes into another game. So there may be some consideration to, if you line them up and you have them in a row, then you don't have to worry about those conflicts, especially if you're having a competition and you've got one match going on, a ball comes flying into it. You can better prevent that by looking at a different configuration. But yes, in most of these 4 that you're looking at, they would be likely.
Also next to it, in only 4 would maintain the space for that there. If you keep that in mind in design going forward, where that might end up.
Also, well, need to do that. Just like you said, that the trees, things like that, government ways and some for these things. It's later at night or in the evening, it's still.
And the fireworks, they need to shoot those off. I think 5 is a problem for that.
It looks like all of them would be.
Would they?
Yeah, because you need at least 400 feet depending on the size.
So maybe 3. Top left.
Possibly on the left side,
Yeah.
the west side. Over there.
Not that has to dictate.
I was
but-
gonna say,
I know
that's
it's one day,
I-
but welcome to East Long Meadow. These are just,
That's
and
okay.
certainly the 4th of July parade, we have to line it up here because we bring it to Birchland and the disperse there. There's no other way to place to put it. We tried. Yeah.
Or the Chestnut Street entrance. Is evaluated a little bit now. So,
That's a great question. No, not yet. It was looking at, there'd be a lot of things to review if that was proposed. One would be zoning and setbacks and open space percentages and all those things that you usually see in the dimensional, guidelines in the zoning bylaw. So no, we haven't looked at that. We would have to look at that and see what are the pros and cons of that. All we were looking at was, realistically, is there even undeveloped space that could potentially offer an opportunity for it? So we saw those as being the 2 locations, but again, how feasible it is, we'd have to work out. And like you said, from a traffic standpoint, that would also happen.
One other
That's
thing
number
about,
6, right? Is that what you're talking about? Yeah. Okay.
just on 5, I think it's worth exploring because I would imagine that is the only one that we wouldn't have to worry about phasing and disrupting the current building. The other ones, it looks like we would have to find some green space. And I think there's value to that, and so this is we're going to the program and follow. I would say we should at least further 5. So I wouldn't be my favorite.
Where would you do 5? That's 5 parking.
So one thing we'll do, so as we get to the point of having to submit PDP to the MSBA in 2 months, I know.
Does that mean that educational plan has to be written in less than 2 months?
Yes, it does.
Okay, great.
We also need to cover many options we end up with. There's 6. 4, the end of PDP, the MSBA wants to see which 3 you'd like to carry forth into the next half of the study. So we'll work with you to develop a list of criteria that help make the decision. And one of those is often is swing space required. Can the school remain operational? Is it some swing space versus the rest? So that certainly is a criteria. Yes. Yes.
To the point where you're tired of it.
July. Yeah.
To the point where
next
you're
meeting.
excited.
I think at the next
Tomato,
meeting.
tomato.
Yeah, I think
Absolutely, yeah.
inviting police and fire, I know that the visioning have been challenging for people to get there, just because June's busy.
I think it's a
But,
good idea.
yeah, but sitting with
Get a-
them, and I talked with both chiefs.
Can we work with you, Gordon?
Yeah, maybe coordinate a time where we can just bring them in.
With them, we'll delineate between code requirements and want preference.
So moving to communications update. Okay. Is that, Ben, is that you and Victoria?
Well,
Communication?
for communications, okay, I think we did that Victoria had a secret to share. Mindful of time. Victoria, if you want to update us quickly and then, we can go.
Sure. Sorry, I'm just having a little hard time hearing a couple voices. But I think it's been covered by Dory, but we just wanted to recap the visioning forum that we had on the 15th. See if anyone had any input, especially when it comes to outreach. If they've heard from anyone in the community that they heard about it and attended, and what their feedback was, or vice versa, if they didn't hear about it, and maybe any missed opportunities that we can look at for future planning of the forum and advertising the forum. Also, I have some questions and answers from the community forum that I'm happy to share with the rest of the committee if they're interested to hear, that were answered at the forum. And also just wanted to update the group that we are working on a FAQ to go up on the website. So, and I just went over a lot of there, but
Victoria, can you circulate those questions and answers?
yep, of course.
Thank you.
And we're live on the website. Ryan gave us a link. Thank you, Ryan. So that it's right on the front landing page of the school district webpage, and then also you can get to it on the landing page of the town. Yeah.
There we're going to share presentation, just information regarding the process, for all of the also recommending that people could get involved, more involved, stay involved. Meetings, public meetings,
One addition to that, so Ryan made a nice link where you go from, if you go to the documents area, it brings you to where our agendas are, but also then once Mr. Mackey has a chance to put up the video from this meeting, that's there as well. So people can see it after the fact. Sure, watch many times if they'd like.
Sure.
Every night.
I know Dory and Helen spoke to it earlier, but it was a pretty good turnout for our first community meeting, if you will. We've seen much fewer, so very thankful for the participation on that level. But we'll be looking to have more of these community forums as we go forward and progress into the summer months and the fall months here. So just want to look out for
Thank you, Ben. New
And if I
business.
could-
Excuse me.
Sorry.
And if I could just add, we also, Ryan posted the recording of the community forum on the website. It's under Project News. So anyone can rewatch the forum there. And at our SLT, I was planning to talk with the group about maybe sending that out, getting that out, and some sort of messaging across maybe town social media that they can review the link, the forum itself. They can watch the video as well.
Very well. Is there any new business? Either online or in the room? Seeing and hearing none.
The questions is if we have any participants. I don't know if we have any visitors.
Cool. Me neither. Good. Okay. Are we setting a time for a follow-up meeting?
Look like yes.
Never mind.
He's
So
smirking.
like we said earlier, I think we would like to meet at some point at the tail end of July, just to provide updates of where we are at in the PDP phase.
Maybe not the end, because we have to get pricing on options. So I would maybe pull from that.
You know, we'll get the
Well, we're at the
Mentally?
beginning of it,
It's
so
like
week of like
second
the
week.
18th or something. Second week.
week of the 18th, Helen, maybe?
Yeah, that would be better,
No.
because there are things that we have to get done.
Is the week of the 18th?
Yeah, what's
I
that?
know
about?
Wednesdays were the previous day that you guys met, so that would be the 20th. I don't know if that's still a good.
This time of day again, 1:30?
We are flexible on our end.
It's typically later. This was kind of a one-off.
This, we can do either, whatever works for the group.
3:30 on the 20th, Steve?
Well,
Put it to the group. Fine by me.
what works better for folks?
Earlier is better for me, but that'll work.
Earlier is better for
Maybe
me as
2,
well, but-
2:30?
You want to shoot for like
Yeah.
a, like,
You know, I'll be on vacation that week.
So what?
So you'll be zooming in?
so what works better in your vacation for the Zoom?
Always earlier is better for me.
You're not around, Don?
Because I have one of those summer concerts.
Okay.
Split the diff, 2 o'clock?
You want to do, well, I mean, Mondays and Tuesdays are open that week too. That should be good. Okay.
Going once?
19th, 2:30. All right. Does that work for everybody online?
Yes.
Okay.
And we can either hold off and wait until that meeting to determine when our August meeting, which will be the vote that we need for the PDP submission. So we can wait until that meeting to memorialize that next one, or if you guys want to put a date out there right now.
So we got a good crowd here. Let's get a
Why
date
not,
going.
right? So we are targeting the end of August. I don't think we've given MSBA a set date, but we were anticipating that we'd have SBC approval before the end of August in order to wrap up our submission and get it in. So I think that being said, that the week of August 22nd is what we would be targeting.
For the school building committee meeting?
For the school building committee meeting, that will be targeted at approving the PDP submission.
The school committee doesn't have to approve.
We're still looking at the 2 o'clock time frame. Does that work? Tuesdays and 2 o'clock?
August 23rd,
I think so. So, just so I'm clear, the educational plan needs to be finished by the 23rd?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Yes.
I was hoping you would say, well, the MSBA doesn't need that. All right.
Actually,
All right, well.
if you could target the end of July, that would be great. I know. Keep asking, and it's gonna move up.
Not writing itself now, come on.
Yeah, we would be looking at that. We do want a meeting, you need a forum.
Okay.
August 23rd?
23rd at 2 o'clock.
Can't do it.
We can't do that.
Can't
Okay.
do Tuesdays.
Oh, so it was Tuesday we just did scheduled?
Can you do the 19th, July?
Sure.
That's a Tuesday though.
Oh, sorry. No, I mean, just,
In
I'm
general.
traveling and I'm
general,
wrapped up on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
So that
almost all.
previous-
But I mean, I don't have to be here.
Yes,
Well,
you
you're
do.
the chair.
So
Steve, forget
July
about Tuesday and
19th?
Thursday.
So
Is it all right or
July
no?
19th is no good then?
No, Tuesdays don't work.
Not
Okay.
Okay.
What about Monday, the 18th, 2 o'clock? Folks online, folks in the room, switching July 19th to Monday, the 18th, does that work at 2 o'clock or 2:30, I think it was what we had?
Yep.
Okay,
We have something.
you're on vacation that week? Oh, but you were on vacation
the
for
room's
the
on
Tuesday
vacation.
as well.
Monday 18th, 2:30, and then 2:30, Monday 18th, 2:30, is that what we decided on?
2:30 is fine, yeah.
And then August 22nd,
It's like we have school committee.
sorry, me, I don't know.
Do you want to do the
Yeah.
Wednesday of that week then?
I think we have the summer concert series.
Oh, okay.
We'll do the 22nd.
Yeah, but
We'll do it during the day, 2 o'clock, 22nd on the 2 o'clock, August?
Yep.
20, online, 22nd, 2 o'clock, does that work?
Yep.
Okay, all right, so we have a 2:30 meeting in July, and we have a 2 o'clock meeting in August. Need a subcommittee for writing the educational plan, going once? Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
Any other matters remaining unresolved? Seeing none, is there a motion to adjourn?
Is that right?
Second.
Hey, wait a second, you're going too fast for me.
Brian Bruce.
Okay. Any motion, adjourn. Bruce seconded, go ahead. Yep. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Online?
Unanimous.
Okay. I think that was unanimous. All right, thank you, everybody. I know that was a long meeting.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Fourth.
So what can we do to help you with that ed plan? Forward